So, the rest of the term, we're going to look at this question: what is art? And this is interesting just because you might be wondering, what is art? But it also gives you a little insight into what a lot of philosophers have been up to in a big portion of the 20th century. A lot of philosophers like myself now, contemporary philosophers, are thinking, maybe this was kind of like a misguided project, but it gives you a little insight into what might work out about this project and what might not. So, what is art? Well, this question is one, like I say, that of a lot of different questions that philosophers have historically asked. And they've asked this about all kinds of what are called concepts or ideas. So just like you could ask, what is art? You could ask, well, what are houses? What are penguins? What are circles, etc., etc. All these things, house, penguin, circle, these are all what we call concepts. They're ideas. And just like you might want to know, well, what does it take for something to count as art, you might ask also, well, what does it take for something to count as a house? Does the little structure that some kids made out of sticks in the backyard, is that a house? What counts for something to be a penguin? If something is like a penguin in a lot of different ways, and yet it can actually fly, does it still count as a penguin? So these questions go beyond just asking what is art, and philosophers in the 20th century developed this process of trying to answer questions like this called conceptual analysis, where the idea is you take a concept like art or penguin or tree or what have you, and then you analyze what sort of conditions make it the case that some particular thing falls under that concept. What conditions will make it the case that a particular thing is indeed a penguin? What particular conditions make it the case that a particular thing is indeed a tree? Or similarly, what kind of conditions make it the case that something is indeed art? And philosophers generally distinguish between two different kinds of conditions, both necessary conditions and sufficient conditions. Now, necessary conditions are conditions that have to be met necessarily in order for something to fall under a concept. So you might think for something like a penguin, well, if something's going to be a penguin, then necessarily it at least has to be a bird. You can't be a penguin unless you are a bird. So that's a necessary condition on being a penguin. Then there's also sufficient conditions. Those are conditions such that if you meet those conditions, that's enough to count as falling under a particular concept. Now, what are the sufficient conditions on being a penguin? That gets a little more difficult. I'll leave that for you as an exercise. You can try and work that out in the discussion. So let me give you an example of this conceptual analysis. We'll take a concept, in this case, the concept bachelor, and we'll try and come up with necessary and sufficient conditions for something counting as a bachelor. So here's the proposal. Here are the necessary conditions. In order to be a bachelor, you have to be male and you have to be unmarried. Unless you're male and unmarried, you just can't be a bachelor. That's not how the concept bachelor works. So the necessary conditions are being male and being unmarried. And here's an idea. The sufficient conditions on being a bachelor are, well, having all of those necessary conditions. So it's enough to count as a bachelor as long as you are both, all at the same time, male and unmarried. So this is a special case in which we say that the conditions of being male and unmarried are necessary and jointly sufficient conditions on being a bachelor. You need to be both male and unmarried to be a bachelor. And as long as jointly you have all those conditions, as long as you are male and unmarried, then you are indeed a bachelor. So there is a